Have you ever felt like something in the forest was watching you? Not a person, not an animal, but the forest itself. The trees, the shadows, the silence. That's how it felt in the woods of northern Argentina. Polar Gómez had lived alone there for 12 years. A quiet lumberjack, tough and calm, used to being surrounded by trees and nothing else. He trusted the forest. Until one morning, the forest changed. While checking trees for firewood, Polar stopped in front of a massive cebu. Its bark was thick and reddish, like old skin. But something had torn through it. 5 long, deep gashes slashed across the trunk, each one as wide as a finger, spaced apart like claws. The marks were so high up that no wildcat or dog could have made them. They weren't random scratches. They were straight, clean, powerful, like something tall, heavy, and very strong had dragged its claws across the tree on purpose. Polar stepped closer. He ran his fingers along the grooves. The wood inside was fresh, pale, and still a little damp. Something had done this recently. A cold sweat ran down his back. He looked around, but nothing moved, no sign of danger. He shook his head. "Just an animal," he whispered, though he didn't believe it. He turned and walked away. Behind him, the claw marks stayed, and somewhere deep in the trees, something heavy was watching. That night, the forest was too quiet. Polar sat outside his cabin beside the stove, blowing gently on a bowl of leftover stew. The trees beyond the firelight stood like statues. No wind, no insects, no owls, nothing. He frowned and muttered, "Where are the crickets tonight?" The silence felt heavy, like something thick pressing down on his chest. He stood slowly, looking toward the tree line. Something in his gut told him this wasn't normal. His voice dropped to a whisper. "What the hell is out there?" Then, a loud thud. Something slammed into his back. He stumbled forward, grunting in pain, nearly falling face first into the dirt. His bowl hit the ground and shattered. He turned around quickly, one hand reaching for the axe, but it was too late. The thing was already there. It stood just beyond the edge of the firelight, tall, hulking, covered in black fur. At first, Polar's brain tried to tell him it was a bear, but then it stepped forward into the light. "No," Polar breathed, eyes wide. "That's not a bear." Its face was human, not living, not fresh. A face stretched too tight over bone, like a dried mask. The eyes were black holes, and the mouth hung open slightly, showing small, uneven teeth. It looked at him, not like a wild animal, but like something that knew him. Polar whispered, "What the hell are you?" Then he turned and ran. Branches slapped his face. His feet pounded the dirt. He could hear it behind him, heavy steps crashing through the clearing. It was fast, faster than it should be. Come on," he gasped, pushing himself toward the lumber pile. He reached the stacked logs, clawed his way up, slipping, bleeding. Something grabbed his shoulder. He screamed, "Ah!" Claws tore across the side of his head. Warm blood poured down his neck. He didn't stop. He pulled himself higher, reached for the edge of the roof, and threw himself up just as claws swept the air behind his heels. He collapsed on the wooden shingles, gasping, body shaking. He could feel the blood soaking through his collar. He reached up to touch his ear, or where it used to be, and hissed through his teeth, "Shit, it's gone. My ear's gone." He didn't look over the edge. He didn't move. He just stared into the sky, waiting for the thing to come back. But it didn't. The night stayed quiet. The next morning, Polar walked into the village with a rag tied around his bleeding head. His steps were slow, his face pale. People stared at him as he passed, some whispering, others pretending not to see. At the small police post, he sat down across from the officer and told everything: the silence, the creature, the claws, the face. When he finished, the officer leaned back in his chair, frowning. "A bear, maybe?" he asked, almost hopeful. Polar shook his head. It looked like a man, but it wasn't. The officer didn't write that down. He just sighed, said he'd make a note, and offered Polar a cup of water. But Polar could tell they didn't believe him. No one did. He left the station in silence. Behind him, the forest waited. And somewhere in the trees, The thing with the human face still remembered his scent. 2 days after Polar's return to the village, a boy went missing. His name was Esteban Ruiz, 16 years old, quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of boy who liked to walk alone after dinner, usually near the edge of the forest. It was something he'd done many times before, something nobody had ever worried about, until now. That night, he didn't come home. At first, his parents thought he'd stayed over with a cousin, but by morning, worry had turned to panic. A search began. Neighbors, hunters, even children joined in, calling his name through the trees. They found nothing. No footprints, no torn clothes, no signs of struggle. Just one thing, a single white sneaker lying half buried in the dirt near a bend in the trail. It was clean. Too clean, like it had been placed there, not dropped. The ground around it was strange. The grass had been flattened in wide, uneven circles. Not like a person had walked through, but like something heavy had rolled or spun. Something large that didn't move like anything they knew. People murmured about jaguars or wild dogs or even human traffickers. "Where did he go missing?" Polar asked one of the shopkeepers. The man hesitated, then pointed west. "Near the big clearing. Past your cabin, not far." It hit him like a punch to the chest. That was exactly where the thing had found him. That was where the silence began. He walked home with his jaw clenched, heart beating hard against his ribs. That night, he didn't light a fire. He sat outside in the dark, axe across his knees, staring into the blackness between the trees. And though he tried to tell himself it was just a coincidence, a part of him already knew. Esteban hadn't just disappeared. Something had taken him. 4 days after Esteban Ruiz disappeared, he came back. It was just after dawn. A fisherman walking the river trail saw a figure standing still at the edge of the trees. The boy was barefoot, clothes torn, arms hanging at his sides. His face was pale. His eyes, wide and still, stared blankly ahead, as if waiting for someone to tell him what to do. They brought him back to the village like a miracle. People cried, prayed, embraced his parents. But Polar, watching from a distance, felt only a quiet dread crawl down his spine. Esteban looked like Esteban, but something about him was wrong. He didn't speak for the first few hours. He didn't cry, didn't ask where he was. He sat on the floor of his home, blinking slowly, his hands resting neatly in his lap. When someone finally asked what had happened, he turned toward them with an almost mechanical slowness and said, "I don't remember." His voice was different, flat, hollow, as if the words weren't coming from inside him, but from somewhere else using his mouth. That night, villagers gathered to celebrate his return. They lit candles, made food, and played music. But Esteban didn't eat, didn't laugh. He just sat near the fire, watching. Not the flames, the people, watching their faces like he was studying them. When Polar approached, their eyes met for the first time. Esteban tilted his head slightly, almost curious. He didn't blink. "Do you know me?" Polar asked, low and careful. The boy smiled, just a little. "Yes," he said. "You smell like the roof." Polar's stomach dropped. No one else reacted. They thought the boy was confused. But Polar remembered. The creature had chased him to the roof of his cabin. He hadn't told that to anyone. That night, Polar didn't sleep. He sat by the window, gripping the axe, eyes on the forest. Somewhere out there, something had returned, wearing Esteban's skin, and it was learning how to be him. Polar didn't return to the village the next morning. He walked the trails alone, as he always had, but now with his axe in hand, not for trees, but for what might be wearing human skin. He couldn't stop thinking about Esteban's words. "You smell like the roof." That wasn't something a boy would say. That was something a predator would remember. By evening, Polar stood outside Esteban's house. A thin light glowed behind the curtains. The village had gone quiet again, not out of fear, but out of denial. To them, the nightmare had ended. To Polar, it was just beginning. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. The door creaked open before he could try a third time. Esteban stood there, still, calm. His eyes looked slightly darker than before. "I wanted to talk," Polar said. Esteban nodded slowly and stepped aside. Inside, the room smelled strange, like damp earth and something faintly metallic. Esteban sat down on a small wooden stool, folding his hands neatly. He didn't ask why Polar was there. He didn't ask anything at all. Polar returned to the village just before dark. He didn't talk to anyone. He walked straight to Esteban's house. The boy opened the door before he knocked. They stared at each other in silence. Polar stepped in slowly. The room smelled wrong, like wet soil and rust. Esteban sat down without a word. He didn't blink, didn't smile. Polar stayed standing. "You're not him," he said quietly. Esteban didn't respond, just tilted his head and watched. Then, after a pause, he smiled. Too wide, too calm. "I'm better." Polar backed toward the door, heart thudding. He didn't run. He didn't speak. That night, he left the village without telling anyone, because whatever wore Esteban's face had only just begun to learn how to act human. Polar didn't stop walking until the lights of the village were far behind him. The forest swallowed him whole, just trees, dirt, and silence. He moved without a plan, only knowing one thing. He couldn't stay, not when the thing wearing Esteban's face was still out there, smiling like it belonged. By morning, he reached a ridge that overlooked the valley. Smoke curled from rooftops in the distance. The village looked peaceful, untouched, but he knew better. Something had already made it inside. He rested there for a moment, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. A map, hand-drawn, years old, marked with the names of other small towns. He circled one. If this thing wasn't alone, someone else would know. Someone else would have seen something. He moved again. 3 days later, in a village north of the river, a man was found dead in his bed, eyes open, mouth frozen mid-scream. His wife swore he'd gone to sleep smiling, said he'd been acting just a little off all week. 2 days after that, a woman went missing near the mines. They found her coat, not her body. And in Polar's old village, Esteban was smiling more now, saying more, joking with friends, eating with family. And yet, those who looked closely said something had changed. The boy never blinked at the right moments. He laughed when no one else did. And once, during the night, someone swore they saw him standing alone in the clearing, looking up at the moon, with both eyes completely black. But by morning, he was back at his table, eating bread and honey like nothing had happened. No one questioned it, no one wanted to, because whatever had returned was no longer just learning. It was blending in. Weeks passed. No one saw Polar again. His cabin stood empty, tools still hanging on the wall, stew pots still half full on the stove, now crusted with mold. The door swung in the wind. Back in the village, people stopped talking about Esteban, not because they stopped wondering, but because wondering became dangerous. He was too polite, too perfect, never tired, never sick, never angry. His teachers said he was a better version of himself. His parents beamed with pride. But his dog stopped going near him. Others began to change too. Small things at first. A woman forgot the name of her own son for a moment, then laughed like it was nothing. A shopkeeper began blinking one eye at a time. A hunter returned from the forest quieter, colder, and a week later, his wife was gone. The village still held birthdays, still sang at weddings, still went to church. But no one really looked each other in the eyes anymore, because deep down, they all had the same fear, that something was wearing someone they loved, and it was smiling right back at them.